Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa man tabi'ahum bi ihsanin ila yawmiddin. Wa ba'd, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah, today we are going to be continuing our book, Riyadh Us-saliheen. Last episode we talked about the Muqaddimah of Imam Nawawi rahimahullah. So on today's episode we are going to be talking about the first chapter, which is Babul Ikhlas wa Hidar Niyya في جميع الأعمال والأقوال والأحوال البارزة والخفية. So Imam Nawawi starts this book with the chapter that talks about sincerity and consciousness of intention in all actions, statements, situations, both apparent and hidden. Now, why did Imam Nawawi start this book with the chapter that talks about intention and sincerity? You see, in Islam, every act of worship is the reward for every act of worship is determined by the intention, the underlying intention for that act of worship. So that is why it's important, and that's why you see that most books of fiqh, most scholars start their books, with the hadiths that talk about intention. And then the first verse, like we said, he actually starts the chapter by quoting verses and ahadith. So the first verse that he quoted here is the verse in Surah Al-Bayyinah where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا أُمِرُوا إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ مُخْلِصِينَ لَهُ الدِّينَ حُنَفَاءَ وَيُقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَيُؤْتُوا الزَّكَاةَ وَذَلِكَ دِينُ الْقَيِّمَةِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says they were not commanded except that they should worship Allah alone, and that they should establish the prayer and give the charity, and that is the straightforward religion. Now, the reason Imam Nawawi starts this chapter with this particular verse is because the only command that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has actually given to the believers, this is the only command that Allah has given us, is to what? To worship Him sincerely, dedicate all our acts of worship sincerely to Him alone. And this command is not peculiar to Muslims alone. All the messengers that came before Muhammad, this was the same command that Allah gave them. That's why Allah says, وَمَا أُمِرُوا. They were not commanded except that they should worship Allah. And this is all. This is all Allah is asking for. And it's funny to think that this is the only thing that Allah wants from us. Once we can do this, we are guaranteed of entering Jannah. So it's strange that on the day of judgment, those people who are going to enter the hellfire, they will be told that Allah did not ask anything much of you other than what you should worship Him alone. And in the hadith of Muaz ibn Jabal, anhu, this hadith is in Sahih Muslim, he says that كنت ردف النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم ذات يوم فقال يا معاذ أتدري ما حق الله على العباد قلت الله ورسوله أعلم قال حق الله على العباد أن يعبدوه ولا يشركوا به شيئا. So Muaz ibn Jabal said, I was riding with the Messenger of Allah a particular day, and he asked me and said, Oh Muaz, do you know the right of Allah on His slaves? And I said, Allah and His Messenger knows best. Then he looked at me and said, the right of Allah on His slaves is that they worship Him alone without associating partners with Him. And then the Messenger of Allah asked again, Atadri ma haqqul ibad Allah, do you know the right of the slaves on Allah? And Muaz ibn Jabal replied by saying, Allahu wa Rasuluhu alam, Allah and His Messenger knows best. And then the Messenger of Allah said, Haqqul ibad Allah and yudkhilahum jannah and la yu'azzibahum is afa'al dhalik. That the right of the slave on Allah is that Allah will not punish them if they do that. So what I'm getting at is that this is the only thing Allah wants from us. Allah created us, gave us everything we want, gave us, good sight, hearing and all that. And the only thing He's asking for return is that we worship Him alone and we don't associate partners with Him. So this is the first thing that as a Muslim you should know, that all Allah is asking from you is that you should be sincere with Him in all acts of ibadah. And then he goes further to quote the verse in Surah Al-Hajj. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لَن يَنَالَ اللَّهَ اللُّحُومُهَا وَلَا دِمَاؤُهَا وَلَكِنْ يَنَالُهُ التَّقْوَى مِنكُمْ. It is not the blood or the meat of the sacrificial animal that reaches Allah, but it is the taqwa. Yeah, it is the fear of Allah that you use in sacrificing Allah that meets Allah. What does this mean? When we sacrifice animal, at the end of Eid al-Adha, Allah is telling us that it is not the animal or the blood that He's interested in. What He's interested in is, do you have that piety to actually get, because it's wealth, right? And to sacrifice it in the cause of Allah, it's taqwa. So some people, they do sacrifice just so that people will see them and praise them and say, this Elijah killed 2 rams or 2 cows. Well, Allah will not accept that, because Allah is interested in the intention behind that sacrifice. And that is why we know in the popular story of the 2 sons of Adam alayhi salam, when Allah commanded the two of them to slaughter, and then they both slaughtered, but Allah accepted from only one of them, and He did not accept the other's sacrifice. And then he was so angry and he said, "La'aqtulannak, I'm going to kill you." And then the other one, who his sacrifice was accepted, said to his brother, "Innama yataqabbalu Allahu min al-muttaqin." Allah only accepts from the righteous, yani from the one who is sincere, from the one who is doing that act of worship for the sake of Allah. This statement is general for all acts of ibadah. Allah only accepts from what? Someone who is doing that act for Him alone. Now, he went further to quote, after quoting these verses, he went further to quote the hadith of Amir al-Mu'minin, Abi Hafs Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anhu. And then he said, قال سمعت الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول إنما الأعمال بالنيات وإنما لكل امرئ ما نوى فمن كانت هجرته إلى الله ورسوله فهجرته إلى الله ورسوله فمن كانت هجرته للدنيا يصيبها أو امرأة ينكحها فهجرته إلى ما هاجر إليه متفق على صحته. This hadith is a very, very popular hadith that is quoted a lot of the time. In fact, most books of fiqh, this is the first hadith that they start with. And this hadith is very, very important. It's so important to the extent that scholars say that this hadith is half of Islam. Half of everything we do in Islam is based on this hadith. Now, it's interesting to note that as important as this hadith is, it was only collected from Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu. The chain of narration ended with Umar. There was no other Sahaba that narrated this hadith and this is what is known as Hadith al-Ahad in Ilm al-Hadith. Usually when hadith is like this, it's collected from just one side. It's authentic, okay, but it's not as authentic as hadith that's mutawatir, that's narrated from several Sahabas. Still, scholars say, despite the fact that only Umar radiallahu anhu collected this hadith, said he had this hadith from Rasulullah, the meaning of this hadith is supported by several other verses and several other ahadith. So that is not a problem. So that this hadith is authentic, no doubt about it. That's just that. Then he goes on to say, he had the Messenger of Allah saying what? Innamal amalu bin niyat. Verily all actions are by their intention. Wa innamal likulli imrin ma nawa, and for every person is what he intended. These first two sentences, scholars have slight arguments regarding their meaning. Some scholars say that these two sentences mean the same thing, right? That the second one is just stressing or emphasizing the point that the first sentence is making. Why some scholars say no, these are two different sentences with two different meanings. But if you sit down carefully and you analyze these two sentences, you come to the conclusion that they have different meaning. The first sentence, the Prophet ﷺ said, "Innamal a'malu binniyat," verily actions are by intention. This is talking about cause. What causes action is intention. And the second sentence, وَإِنَّمَا لِكُلِّ امْرِئٍ مَا نَوَى, and for every person is what he intended. And this is talking about result. Yani the result of every action, yani the reward for every action depends on the underlying intention. So you see that they are actually different. The first is talking about the cause, the second is talking about the result. And then the Prophet gave an example. He said, فَمَنْ كَانَتْ هِجْرَتُهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ فَهِجْرَتُهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ. So for example, whoever does hijrah for the sake of Allah and His Messenger, then he will be rewarded for the sake of Allah and His Messenger. And whoever does hijrah, مَنْ كَانَتْ هِجْرَتُهُ لِدُنْيَا يُصِيبُهَا أَوْ امْرَأَةٍ يَنكِحُهَا, he does hijrah because he wants to come to a particular land to get married to a woman, or he wants to come and do business or anything like that. Then his hijrah is based on what he intended. So scholars also, Ibn Salih al-Taymiyyah commenting on this hadith, he said the reason, some scholars discussing why the Prophet in the last sentence he said فَهِجْرَتُهُ إِلَى مَا هَاجَرَ إِلَيْهِ, then his hijrah is to what he intended. He didn't say his hijrah is to the dunya or the woman he came to marry. And the reason for this is, some scholars say probably is because the Prophet doesn't want to prolong, make it too long. Or scholars say some others say the reason he didn't mention it again is because he to belittle the affair of one who is making hijrah for the sake of dunya or a woman. And this hadith, like we said, is muttafaqun alayh. That means that it was collected by both Imam Bukhari and Muslim, and they agreed upon the fact that this hadith is authentic from the Prophet ﷺ. Like I said before, this hadith is half of, the scholars used to say that Islam is based on two hadith. This is the first one. Inshallah, we are going to take the second one. So half of every ibadah that you do is based on this hadith. Now, this hadith is talking about the intention. So all actions are going to be according to the intention for that action. After knowing this, we should know that the intention, mahalluha al-qalb, the position of the intention is in the heart. It is not to be uttered with the tongue. You do not come and say, Allahumma inni nawaitu kaza kaza kaza. No. This is an innovation, because in all the acts of worship that the Prophet ﷺ did, it was never reported even once that he actually uttered the intention. So it's an innovation, and all scholars condemn this. You do not utter the intention. The intention is a statement of the heart. It's something that is present in your heart, and in fact, scholars used to say that it is not possible to do any action without intention. And that's what Rasulullah said, innamal amalu binniyat. Yani actions are only by intention. So it's because Ibn Salah al-Thaymin, he says, لَوْ كَلَّفَنَا اللَّهُ بِعَمَلٍ بِلَا نِيَّةٍ لَقَدْ كَلَّفَنَا بِمَا لَا نُطِيقُ. If Allah had placed on us, an action and say, okay, do this, but don't do it with intention, it would have been impossible. So it is not possible to do any action without intention. We should know this. Then the intention, the position of it is in the heart, like we said before. It's not to be uttered. Then when you are making your intention as a Muslim, there are three things or three conditions of to have a proper intention. Number one is that you have the intention that this is an act of ibadah. Let's say, for example, I pick up the Quran and I want to recite. I should have the intention that what I'm about to do is an act of worship. This is the very first thing. Then the second thing is that I should have it in my mind that I'm doing this act of ibadah lillah. This worship, this Quran I'm about to recite, I'm doing it for the sake of Allah. And then the third thing is that I am doing this intention. I'm reciting this Quran, or I'm doing this act of ibadah for the sake of Allah. Why? Because He commanded me to do it. Imtisalan li amri Allah, in obedience to Allah. So once these three things are present in your intention, then you can have the full reward of the intention. Because it's possible for someone to have the intention of ibadah, but he will not do it for the sake of Allah. It's possible for one to have the intention of ibadah, do it for the sake of Allah, but not do it in obedience to Allah. He might do it maybe in obedience to his parent, his husband, her husband, or anything. So it might be a superior person commanding you to do that act of ibadah. So you have to have these three things in control. Number one, this is an act of ibadah. Number two, you are doing it for the sake of Allah. And number three, you are doing it in obedience to the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So basically, with this, we come to the end of the explanation of this hadith. On this issue of hijrah has a very lengthy explanation. Inshallah, there is a hadith we are going to take further on in this book, where we are going to talk more on hijrah. So I don't want to talk on it now. Inshallah, later on we are going to talk on it. But for today, we are, this is where we are going to stop today, so that the video will not be too long. And inshallah, in the next episode, we are going to go to the hadith of al-Mu'mineen, Aisha radiallahu anha. We pray that Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will accept from us this as an act of ibadah, and whatever we have said here that is wrong and a mistake, may He forgive us, and whatever is correct, may He give us the full reward. If there is any question or comment on the explanation, you can put it in the comment section, and also don't forget to like and subscribe so that you get a notification whenever we upload the new episode. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.